Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go around is Sam Knuth. Sam is a longtime techie, currently a senior director at Red Hat, where I happen to work right now, possibly a dog owner at this point, we'll see, an author of awesome ideas, and he's also been diagnosed with autism. It's obvious he's done a lot of study and reflection in general, but he doesn't hold this knowledge inside just for himself. Rather, he takes the time to break down individual concepts so that it's ingestible by anyone. I hope you join me with curiosity in this conversation with Sam. Sam Knuth? I said that correct, right?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. Thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast.
Hey, thank you. My pleasure.
All right. So the way this thing starts is you and I are... So are you a dog person? I'm going to start with that.
I'm actually driving tomorrow to adopt a dog with my family for the first time. So I would normally say no, but I think I will be shortly.
Soon to be a dog person. All right. See, so you didn't realize I've been peeking in your windows for the last week, right? Gathering evidence. No. So the premise here is you and I are at the dog park. You've got your new dog, and we're sitting there and we're watching our dogs run around and have a good time. So we start up a conversation, as one is wont to do. And I tell you about me, and I'm very boring. So we get through that portion of it, that painful portion, very quickly. And now it's your turn to reciprocate. So, Sam, who are you?
Oh boy. Yeah, that is a big question. I mean, normally if I was in the dog park, we probably wouldn't end up having a conversation because I'd be kind of averting my eyes to avoid talking to people because I tend to be quite introverted. So I am, geez, that's a big question when you ask it that way. I am, I guess I'll just say I am a person who's from Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's where I was born and raised. Then I moved around a bunch as an adult, kind of took my time finding my focus and ended up somehow at Red Hat and kind of getting into computers, where I've built a career at Red Hat that was much different than anything I ever imagined until it was happening. And I'm living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I've been for most of the last 20 years.
All right. So you went from like one temperature extreme to the next, huh?
Yeah. Well, Santa Fe is not hot. It's actually just perfect. It's in the mountains, and a lot of people think it might be hotter than it is, but it's pretty much four perfect seasons. But I have traded it for a much harsher climate, I would say. Yes.
More conducive to staying inside most of the time, I assume.
Yeah.
All right. So you started in Santa Fe. I assume you stayed there for what? Like till you were what? 15, 16, 18, somewhere in the neighborhood?
19. Yeah, I left when I was 19 and went to college. Started my college career in Los Angeles.
Really? College in LA. Wow. So how big a town, like a community is Santa Fe? Were you like in your school, were you like one of like 100 people in your graduating class, or?
2,000, one of 2,000 in my high school class. It's about 100,000 people in Santa Fe, probably a little bit less when I was there. But at the time we had one high school and the second high school had just opened up. So, but yeah, 2,000 kids. Yeah.
That's pretty, well, that's more than I had anticipated. I was just thinking, you said you were shy and introverted, and then all of a sudden 19-year-old Sam finds himself in LA, and there's a lot of people in LA. So was that a bit of a culture shock for you, making the switch?
Oh, totally. And I was at the University of Southern California, which is south of downtown, and this was in the mid '90s. And yeah, I mean, I went from like this sort of mountain desert, small city kind of paradise type of place to like really like dense pollution, traffic, just concrete, mess everywhere. And it was an extreme culture shock. Yeah, it didn't go that well, actually. I freaked out a bit. I ended up, within the first couple of months, I was like frantically filling out transfer applications to schools, mostly in small rural locations, because I was like totally not into whatever I was experiencing in South Los Angeles. Yeah.
Did you survive the college experience there the entire time, or did you switch colleges? Did the transfer happen?
Yeah, I did transfer after that first year to Middlebury College in Vermont, which I had never been to, didn't visit before I showed up, and it just seemed like the place that was the most different from where I was, and so I was like, I just want to apply to places that are extremely different from where I am, and I got in, and I went, yeah.
So that seems incongruous with somebody who's shy and introverted. You go to LA and you're like, I got to get out of here. So let me go to a place completely across the country where I've never been. I don't know anybody. That seems a bit brave to me.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if I thought about it like that. I thought it was more like I was just reacting to, I think actually part of it is that I didn't have a lot of self-awareness at the time, but I knew that whatever was happening in Los Angeles was just not a good thing. Like, I just felt like this is not right. I'm not fitting here. I think I really felt like I didn't fit. Like, I didn't belong. I didn't understand what was happening. And I think I had wanted to study. I went for their music particular music program, which I then realized once I saw the level of talent in all the other music students, I realized that, like, whoa, I was a little off my mark here. And I felt pretty inadequate in terms of my abilities to finish the program. And so I was really just looking, maybe I was really looking for an escape. I don't know. I don't know if I would have phrased it that way at the time, but I was kind of like, I kind of feel like I was like running away from whatever was happening. So I felt like it was kind of in line with my, like, I'm just not meshing with this. I'm not fitting in here, whatever this is.
So that feeling of not meshing or fitting in, was it like an emotional thing or just like a physical response that you didn't necessarily have your finger on?
Both. Both. Yeah. There were very tangible aspects. Like, it was hard for me to meet people. I didn't feel like I didn't like relate to the people I was living with. I was in an apartment, off campus, because the dorms were full. So they put a bunch of us in like these apartments, which is just it just, yeah. And then I didn't even know, like, sort of how to do basic life, like grocery shopping and all that kind of stuff. And then also just, yeah, emotionally, I just felt unsettled, I think.
That's a rough place to be. So were there physical manifestations of these feelings? Like, did you get like extreme anxiety, or like, did it make you feel like, because it seems like you said, you had trouble making friends with people. And to me, like, if I'm in this scenario where I feel terrified, it makes me want to shrink away from people even more, which exacerbates the problem. So were there kind of physical manifestations in that way?
Yeah. I think I did have a lot of anxiety. And, later I would actually be diagnosed with anxiety, among other things. But at that time, I didn't have that level. I didn't have those words for it. Like, so I didn't really know what was happening. But yeah, definitely anxiety. And I started doing things like I started fasting, and like experimenting with different things like that, and just trying to like Well, I was doing things to kind of, I guess, maybe test myself. I started running a bit, which I had never done before, and just doing different things to kind of like maybe push my body a little bit, and maybe I think that was actually just a manifestation of some of the anxiety I was feeling and not knowing how to channel it, not knowing what to do with it.
Golly, so you're there, you're alone, you're lost, and so you're trying all this experimentation.
Yeah.
Like, why wasn't, I mean, and I know why this is true for me here in the South and kind of the environment I grew up in, but why do you think it was that it never occurred to you to like, hey, maybe this is something I could find some help with, maybe, therapy or, just anybody, maybe go to the doctor and talk to him about this stuff?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's the mid 90s. I feel like we're in a different place now with mental health awareness and acceptance than we were then. So I feel like at that point is when you were just starting. I remember actually my dad was my dad had been going through some depression work, and I think he had been taking Prozac at the time and was reading a bunch of books about it. There was a big backlash coming at that time against Prozac, which was really the only SSRI I think that was, if I'm remembering right, it was really the only one that was out there. So I think mental health treatment was in a different place. Stigma was in a different place. And so I just don't feel like it was the kind of thing where it would occur to people. It certainly didn't occur to me as like a healthy thing to do to like, get some help like that. It felt more like that would be a negative thing of sort of like admitting that you had that that you were having challenges like that. But plus I just don't think I had enough self-awareness to even get it together to like think about going to a doctor for any reason. I mean, it was like, this just wasn't happening at the time. Yeah.
Sounds like you were just in survival mode, just trying to stay alive.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
Yeah. And I think I echo a lot of the sentiments you had as growing up, there was a real strong stigma here in the South for sure. Part of that around, masculinity, and you can't be perceived as weak. Part of it being, if you go to the doctor, you're going to be labeled as unstable or crazy person, or that's the person that has to go to a psychiatrist. And so it's, which is so ironic, thinking about, if, I break my arm and the bone's sticking out, do I just say, oh, maybe you should stop bleeding? Maybe you should try just not being hurt. It's like, no, we go to the doctor, we get help, right? We ask somebody to help us. And, when other parts of our life are out of our control, why is it so scary to go and ask for help from somebody?
Yeah. And I think that, it's funny though that you use that analogy, because I was thinking of that analogy really just, I remember I was actually in a leadership development program in 2019. So just a few years ago, where I think I almost had this exact same conversation with a group of very senior leaders in this program, because I felt like we still weren't getting it. And there was somebody in the program had actually broken a leg recently in like a skiing accident or something, had a cast. And there was just so much outpouring of like sympathy and like, understanding and accommodation for this person who's in a cast. And I was just like, wow, yeah, if somebody has like, a mental health diagnosis, they do not get that level of sympathy and understanding and empathy and, oh, how can I adjust my behavior to help you, like, let me get the door for you or whatever. And so I really was just thinking about that a lot. And I guess it's funny that I was thinking about that in 2019, because it's like, that was right before shortly after that, I became public about my mental health and neurodivergent diagnoses. But at that point, I still hadn't been. And I think that was one of the things that really got to me. It's like, yeah, if somebody has like a broken leg, first of all, they don't try and hide it. Um, and second of all, they don't feel shame for it unless maybe they did something really embarrassing that, resulted in it. But even then, they're and so it was kind of like, why shouldn't I be more open about this? And why can't we talk about this? And why couldn't I get the same kind of, I don't know, response? So yeah, there's definitely something to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'd love for you to expand upon this stuff, but I think it comes back to that stigma. Like, so if you're filing for a job application and you put, I've got diabetes, right? You're not going to just be categorized in some, tangible way in this person's mind. Whereas if you say, I'm autistic, or I've got this disability, or, like I've got this impact, then I think it is scarier to announce that to the world, right? And because sometimes it can feel dangerous, or I don't know how this person's going to perceive it, right? And I've had to protect myself with this information for so long. So I definitely, to me, it's like the brave new frontier when folks like yourself do come out and are so vocal about it, and honestly open enough to come into a conversation like this with another person.
Yeah, I think about that a lot because I've had a really positive experience disclosing so I am an autistic person, late diagnosed autistic person, and before that I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder and a couple other things that I had written about. And it's, but the thing is I didn't share any of that until I was in a relatively senior role at Red Hat. And I had been at Red Hat, my current company, for about 15 years already. Oh, wow. And so I felt like I had a lot of security and a lot of support. But thinking on it, like, I had my mental health diagnoses, I think in 2001, and I didn't disclose them at work until 2019. And so, that's a pretty big gap. Right? Like I think there's a reason that I didn't do it sooner. And partially it's like, I don't think it's actually safe for a lot of people to do it. And that's why it's really important to me now to be really open and to have conversations, because I think that, it's sort of like, it's much easier to do after you've achieved a certain level or a certain accomplishment or a certain place, and then people will have different reactions. But I think if you disclose early, it could actually shape people's impression of you. And who knows, maybe I wouldn't have gotten a certain opportunity if my boss had known that I had a particular mental health condition, because maybe in their head they would have a negative association with that, or they would have some stereotype. Or if not my boss, maybe their boss might have to approve, a promotion or a leadership opportunity, and might be hesitant to do that if I was open about these things at that time. So I do think about a lot. Like, I think it's important to disclose, but I also think that I have a lot of privilege in who I am and where I am in my career that enables me to do that. And at this point, I feel like, I really have nothing to lose. But that's not the case for a lot of people. So,
have nothing to lose. What does that mean? You have nothing to lose?
Well, I mean, I do think that's literally true, because I just in my career, I've achieved more than I ever set out to achieve. And I kind of feel like I never imagined that I would have as much as I have in terms of where I've gotten in my career and the stability that I have in my life and my family. And so I just feel really fortunate and really lucky. And, at this point, I feel like I have the privilege to make decisions of like, okay, if I do this thing, like tell the world that I'm a late diagnosed autistic person, and there's like a negative consequence on my career, I don't care. To me, it's more important to be open, and hopefully to advocate and help support others than it is to sort of do what I think I have to do for the benefit of my career. Whereas earlier, when I didn't feel that way, I would say, you know what, whatever I have to gain from disclosing my conditions is outweighed by whatever I have to lose in terms of like my ability to keep building my career and achieve those goals. But, at some point in the past few years, probably, coinciding with the pandemic and just the massive realignment of priorities that caused, I've just sort of, it's really prompted me to rethink my priorities and really confirmed for me that like, I got to focus on what I feel like is more important and true to my values. And, I think that that's not always going to be putting my best interests from a sort of professional or political standpoint first, right? And frankly, when you're in a leadership role, I think there is a political aspect of it for sure, that a lot of people pay attention to very closely.
Yeah, I totally get like all of that. Like the idea that first, if I prove to them that I am capable, I deserve to be in this spot, and then, oh, by the way, this is also who I am, then it doesn't color the way they perceive you or theoretically the performance you may have. You could say, I've done all of this while. So I totally get the idea of not necessarily feeling comfortable right off the bat. And I've actually got a personal experience. So I was a people manager for like ever and ever. And it's probably one of the most gratifying things I've ever done is to be able to mentor, especially young engineers as they come up. And I love to see the little birds spread their wings and fly away. Like as much as I hate to see people go, I love to see them flourish. It does so much for me personally. And I had probably my single most absolutely my single most talented engineer I ever had. We would run into problems where, we'd have projects that needed to be completed and there were multiple steps, and it was just follow through and completion and, making sure all of the boxes got ticked and things like that. We would have problems, and I never approached it. I don't know if this was the right way or the wrong way, but I never approached it like, hey, you're doing these things wrong. It was always, hey, do you have the right tools? Hey, what methods are we trying to approach these things with? It was like, maybe let's try this. And a lot of it was accountability systems. Because I told him, when you leave me, I'm not going to be your PAA, your personal analog assistant. I'm not going to be able to be here to remind you and check ins, right? So we got to develop a strategy that works for you. And so we tried lots of different things, and we ended up settling on one that truly worked for them. Long story short, it was like 2.5 years later, we were at an event, and I happened to meet his mom. She was there, and she was just talking to me about him. And within 5 minutes, she told me how he was autistic. And, and in the very specific ways he was. And it was so crazy. I had almost like this galaxy brain moment, because I just looked through that lens backwards at all of the things, all of the trials and tribulations and all of the it's like all of the strategies we had to go to. And it's like, I get it. Like all of it makes sense now. And I was also like of two minds. I was thinking, had I known that up front, we could have addressed these things head on, but also up front, he didn't know me, right? He didn't know if he could trust me. And also looking back, I don't know that wouldn't have colored the way I looked at him and his performance from then on. Like I honestly, because I'm not in that position to repeat it, and I honestly don't know. I would hope that I would have used the same strategies, right, with patience and approaching, with like how do we figure this out? This is a puzzle. Let's figure it out. But I totally understand that, and I don't know that he had told anybody else, and it wasn't my story to tell, so I wasn't going to. But
yeah, well, this is so interesting. This is a great example. I love the story, and I think you totally did the right thing, and it sounds like you're a really good people manager. A couple aspects of that. First of all, the kinds of challenges that you're talking about are very common among neurodivergent people, and we generally call that challenges with executive function, is kind of the way people refer to that. And a lot of times it's about the structure, having the right accountability mechanisms, or the right pathway charted out, just the right structure to kind of get you from point A to point B. And a lot of folks are extremely capable, but maybe just have a little bit of trouble navigating the path. And it's like, if you have a little bit of support, you can go, you can do it, you can get there. But if you don't have that support, it's like you're trying to drive through a town of windy streets, and like, where you're going, but you don't know the streets, and you don't have a map, and you're just like driving around in circles. And so the way you handled that, I think, is really great, because I think that's the best thing to do, is to just work with the individual to say, hey, let's figure out what works best. And as the manager, you have observations about where the problems are. The person might be aware of them. They might actually not be aware of them. They might just feel like, I know I'm failing, but I don't know why I'm failing, and I don't know exactly how I'm failing. And so for you to be able to articulate, hey, I think this person has all these great qualities, but they're having trouble with, this piece of getting this thing over the line, or they just need to like put it in this format and send it to me. Those things are really, really insightful, and can be really helpful. And just approaching it in terms of like, hey, let's make a plan together for how we're going to work. How about I check in with you a couple times a week? Maybe these are the questions that I'll ask you. This is what I'd like to see, by Friday or by next Wednesday or whatever, sort of get anything you can do to kind of add that structure, I think is really helpful. And then it's really interesting that you found out later that the person was autistic, because I think, first of all, one of the big things that we talk about when we talk about acceptance of or accommodations for neurodivergent people is really there's no like accommodation for neurodivergent people that would not be appreciated by anybody. And so the first thing I say is like, you don't have to know that someone has a diagnosis. You don't have to wait for someone to disclose. If you're a manager, you could just sit down with any employee and say, hey, let's make a plan for how we work best together. Let's make a plan for so that you understand what my expectations are, and I understand how you're going to hold yourself accountable for those expectations, or what support you need from me to meet those expectations. And so, but the fact that his mom told you, this is a whole other issue, to be honest. It's not her story to tell any more than it's your story to tell, right? So I would say, this is a challenge that a lot of autistic adults and a lot of neurodivergent adults have with their parents. Is that a lot of parents will sort of do those kinds of disclosures, or have their own emotions about the condition that their child has, and those are can often be problematic, and some very different perspectives between how parents feel about things and how their children feel about things. And it's one thing when your child is a child, but when your child is an adult, it becomes a very different thing. And so there's a huge amount of discussion in the neurodivergent communities that I've observed on this topic, and sort of like the different perceptions, especially as you have more and more autistic people and other neurodivergent people who are coming into adulthood and sort of claiming their independence in ways that was not true in the past, and that people didn't do. So I think that's an interesting thing. And I wonder, I would also wonder if the person from the beginning had said, "Hey, I'm autistic," would you have had whatever stereotypes you have in your head, or that you might not even be aware of what an autistic person is, would that have lowered your expectations? And maybe, like, what I would worry about is that instead of just saying, okay, how do we figure out the right support system for this employee, you might say, okay, well, this employee is great, but they're autistic, and so they're probably never going to be able to, get this thing over the line, or they're probably never going to be able to operate fully independently, or something like that. And you might not have tried. I don't know. No, I guess you never know. But that's what I worry about, is that there are a lot of stereotypes out there that are largely ill-informed, and so I do. That's bringing it back to the whole disclosure question. It is risky, and there's a lot of uncertainty that people have, and I've heard, unfortunately, a lot of people have shared with me that they have had negative experiences when they've disclosed, and including being completely derailed from a role and having to leave the company. So I think that the risk is very real, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I can absolutely understand that. Think of the hiring process. A lot of times if you open up a spot, you're going to get 100 candidates, right? And so there's always a fear. I don't want to put anything on there that could potentially eliminate me from that, because it is so hard, to get over here, get over there. I got to tell you, getting into Red Hat was the hardest grind I've ever. That was the longest 9 months of my life getting into this place. But it's it's a bit of Shangri-La, a bit of utopia once I'm in here. I love this place. Truly,
and
the best
funny
place
because I do hear that. So for many years I had an organization of hundreds of people that I was responsible for, and so we did a lot of hiring, and I definitely heard that feedback, that it that our interview process was really hard. And the way I used to think about that was, well, that's good, because we have certain standards, or we have certain expectations. We want to make sure people know what they're getting into, right? But I've since really changed my perspective on that, now that I've gone through my own experiences and self-reflection, and I've realized, we do have to be really careful that we're putting people through too much in the interview process, which, first of all, could eliminate a lot of people just based on all kinds of different elements of diversity. And it really reinforces the idea that we're looking for a certain kind of person. And, that is where I think more and more people are having the realization that if you are looking for a certain kind of person to hire, and you kind of think of it as a cultural fit for your organization, that, there's a good chance that person who's a good cultural fit also demographically is similar to you. And so that is a real challenge that we need to work on. So I think that actually making improvements to making the hiring process more inclusive, so that you so that people who get hired don't say, that's the hardest experience I've ever had in my career. That's definitely a goal of mine for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough to know a couple of people on the inside. So
Yeah.
just through having real candid conversations with them, I knew this is the place I wanted to be. And it's one of those things that I wouldn't say it out loud because I didn't want to be disappointed if it didn't come to fruition. It's one of those, I guess you would almost call that a superstition. But I would say that I was cautiously optimistic the entire time, but I knew it's the direction I wanted to move in, and persevered in it. And what's so funny is now that I'm on the inside, all I want to do is grab the best talent I can find and bring them in. All the people that I've worked with that were so talented. And I think that's a lot of what Red Hat is. It's like, if you've worked with really good people, you want to continue to work with really good people and surrounded by good people. And also I found inside of Red Hat, there are some amazingly talented people in here. Holy cow. From all different walks of life, all different personality types. They're all at different stages of life. Somebody once told me that I never want to be the smartest guy in the room because I'll have nothing to learn. And I realized upon entering Red Hat, well, that's not a problem for me. I will never be the smartest guy in the room. I love it. So I'm constantly learning in this environment.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that I think if anything, we do tend to be a group of people who want to learn, and I think that's a quality we seek out in folks, and I think people do challenge each other, and I hear from a lot of people that just being around people who are so engaged, intellectually is a big benefit of working here. And so I think that's great. But I do think we have to put in more thought into how that's manifest and how we identify those characteristics in people and what biases we might have in terms of, like, you can imagine people might have certain unconscious biases about what kind of person, would thrive in that environment. And not everyone would thrive, right? I mean, there's a fair point to that. Something that one person finds really stimulating and engaging, another person might find really intimidating and scary. And so is that okay? And the people who find it scary, we just don't want those people? Or do we want to make it, so that different people who approach dynamics like that differently can find a place and contribute here effectively? So, I think these are the kind of questions that we need to wrestle with as a company.
Mm. Yeah. And, it's funny for me, I had kind of a renaissance around my 30-year mark. So I've always been a technical person, much like probably everybody else inside of, virtually everybody else inside of Red Hat. And so for my entire career, I've studied, I've done certifications, I've maintained certifications for nearly 2 decades. And, it was always straightforward for me. Like it was obvious that I would grab a technical manual and I would learn a new technical thing. But for some reason, it never occurred to me that I could grab a book or a resource or another person and learn more about my personality or other personalities, or, how to be better or do better as a human. I don't know why that we always have so much emphasis on, hey, we can gain technical knowledge, but we never think about improving our emotional IQ, or things like that. Do you feel like Red Hat is, to me, I don't know, Red Hat is this unicorn. It's unlike any place I've ever worked. So this is like a loaded question for me, because the answer is a resounding yes. But do you feel like Red Hat is really moving forward in kind of, more education in like neurodiversity or various things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no question. I think I feel very lucky to be in a place that has so many supportive and curious and understanding leaders, and I just feel like it has that in our DNA. And honestly, yeah, what you describe about like, curiosity about technical subjects versus curiosity about like human subjects. I think a lot of people are having that realization, and that's what led me to ultimately seek out an assessment for autism. Is it was really the combination of the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, which happened just a few miles from my house. It really made me realize, wow, there's a lot of stuff about the world that I'm living in every day that I do not understand or appreciate. And I need to figure that out. So like, before, like early in my career, like I was diving through technical books that had tutorials and like, figuring stuff out. And then as I moved into leadership roles, that changed to like, I'd be tearing through the latest business books and just like really geeking out on like, business books. And it's all about like strategy and other really sort of practical things. But then what I found is like those books started to get like over the past decade, I think business books have actually started to get a lot more about the human aspects of leadership, and emotional IQ, I think is a great way to describe it. But then when summer of 2020 happened, it was just like a total like reorientation of my priorities. And I really started reading, I started reading a lot more novels, and particularly novels by Black and Indigenous authors, and then later novels and memoirs by autistic and neurodivergent people, and just really trying to get a different perspective on life and just try and figure out like, how was I so oblivious to all of this like really bad stuff that's happening in our society, or just to how much a lot of other people who are in a similar place in life that I am, how much they have to deal with that I don't have to deal with. And that led me to a lot of self-reflection. And then it really led me to realizing like how much of myself I actually sort of hide in a lot of context, or how much time I spend pretending to enjoy myself when I'm not really enjoying myself, or how many kind of things I do to go through what I think people want me to do or what is expected of me versus what my intuition is, or what I think is what I want to do, or that kind of thing. And, to a certain extent, we all got to do things that we don't like to do. But I realized that there was something deeper going on, and that I had been fundamentally sort of suppressing a lot of things about myself that I had learned how to suppress. I mean, it's funny, I started talking about my first college experience where I was just so awkward, and like it was so hard for me to understand other people and to articulate how I felt, and to just, I really felt like I was in survival mode. And in retrospect, it makes perfect sense because, as an autistic person, I didn't know that that's what was going on, but, it really was just this bizarre experience that was very, very hard for me to navigate. And then I kind of see my life from then up until I started to have success in my career at Red Hat as like learning how to be normal is the way I kind of thought of it. So I would kind of pick up on the cues. Okay, when I do that, people think it's weird. So I'm going to not do that anymore. I'm going to, when I say that kind of thing, it doesn't go over well. So let me, kind of learn how to squeeze squeeze that area between your thumb and your finger when you feel like, to kind of stop yourself from kind of how can I alert myself that oh, you're doing it again. Hold on. And literally just learning how to, okay, when somebody says, how are you? You say, fine, thanks. How are you? Even if it doesn't make any sense to you to say that at all. So there was a whole number of things that I literally was just learning, sort of a checklist of, okay, in this situation, do this, in this situation, do this. And I actually got really good at that in terms of just figuring out what's the right thing to say at the right time to the right people to make this certain impression that will lead to a certain thing. And I really feel like that was a big part of my career success once I really started to figure that stuff out. So then when I sort of had this 2020 experience and was going through this diagnostic process, it's a lot to unwind. And there's a lot of deep layers to how deep that stuff is, and how hard it is to walk back from it. And so that's been sort of what I've been going through. But in doing that, it's made me much more empathetic to people who are divergent from the majority group in other ways, don't have the ability to hide it, right? So I've got a difference about me that I can easily hide because, at the end of the day, I'm a heterosexual white man. I can blend in, right? And there's a lot of people who I think do mask, but it doesn't necessarily have the same effect. And in talking to people from other communities of diverse of people of diverse backgrounds, I have found that this idea of masking is very common. It's a very common thread. And I think the reason it's so common among neurodivergent people is because it's we can really transform ourselves because people don't, people don't, when they first see me, they see a straight cisgendered white man. They don't see an autistic person. And there's all kinds of different ways people can mask. But I just, I'm not sure where I'm going with this now, but it's just it's like a very layered, very complex thing.
Mm. Well, you've touched on a lot. You covered a lot of ground really quickly, and one of the key things that was a new concept. I understood it for what it was, but until it had a kind of a name, and I did a little bit more researching, I didn't realize to what extent people go. And you said masking, and that's where you hide your natural behaviors, tendencies to mirror those more of, I guess, standard or accepted society, or wherever you happen to find yourself at the time, right?
Yeah.
So I was going to say something that really surprised me was we did, oh my goodness, it was 2 weeks ago. There was a call. I think it was one of the hour-long calls. It was about, I think we had a speaker on neurodiversity and things like that, and they were talking about how sometimes things that are for neurotypical folks that are just easy and obvious and just commonplace can be so mysterious for people that are neurodivergent or super stress-filled or anxiety-ridden. Somebody gave an example of doing the laundry, that they just get filled with anxiety at the thought of having to do their laundry. Or somebody said that whenever they get their mail, sometimes an envelope will sit on their counter for 2 weeks because it gives them so much anxiety. Another one that really astounded me was they said, I can't order delivery food because it gives me so much anxiety to think the delivery guy might ring the doorbell. And it's just to me, that like clicked some switches in my brain. It's like, things that I just take for granted, like opening a letter, doing the laundry, can be a mountain for somebody else to climb. And it had never made sense to me in such a way until I heard those stories. And I knew it to be true, but until I heard those like tangible examples, I mean, goodness, that hit me hard in a way I hadn't anticipated.
Mhm.
And I guess that kind of goes
Yeah.
hand in hand with masking, right?
Totally. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny you mentioned those examples. So like, I'm really glad that you went to that talk, and to your earlier question that I think I got completely sidetracked from, you know, the fact that we had that talk at Red Hat is I think a really big deal. That people were really supportive of in the we put that on as the neurodiversity community, and the company was really supportive of it, and then a lot of people came, right? Hundreds and hundreds of people came, and it was very well received. So I think that indicates that I think we're on a very good path here. But yeah, I resonate with all of those things, and the amazing thing about the neurodiversity community we have is people share stories like that all the time, and nobody thinks it's weird. It's like literally in our chat room last week, people were giving tips about like how to make doing the laundry less stressful, and it is interesting that those are exactly the kinds of things that I think a lot of people share those anxieties in the neurodivergent community. But those are the kinds of things that, I think most people would never want anyone else to know about, right? And so it's like it's easy to hide that stuff from everyone but yourself and your spouse probably. But it's really hard to share it. And so I think the fact that we're in a place where people are starting to feel comfortable sharing, and then other people are saying, oh yeah, me too, let me tell you what works for me with that, like here's how I deal with that whole doorbell anxiety thing, is that's really powerful. And I think that's helping people realize to the extent that they were masking, and it's creating this kind of sense of safety where, hey, maybe it's okay to kind of step out from behind and just be more honest. And instead of like, making up some story, I'm just going to tell people, hey, I don't want to do this because it makes me anxious. Or here's why I'm struggling with this idea. And just kind of telling the truth. That's a pretty revolutionary idea for a lot of people, I think.
Well, when you're talking about, all the things that we hide, and we all do to some extent or another, but to me, it's like when you hide something, that's kind of an indication in your brain that I'm doing something wrong or I'm doing something bad.
Yeah.
You think it kind of feeds that little part of your brain that says something's wrong.
Oh yeah, that's one of the most common refrains that I hear. What's wrong with me? And I think for people who are undiagnosed or who don't have a community, I think that's one of the most common things. What is wrong with me? Or sort of a harsher version of that, of people just really beating themselves up about like, I can't believe how stupid I am or whatever. So yeah, exactly. And that's where, the whole concept of neurodivergence versus being neurotypical, it kind of sets up this paradigm that being neurotypical is the right way to be, and being neurodivergent is the wrong way to be. And that's really what the neurodiversity movement is trying to change, is like, hey, let's get out of that mindset of thinking that one way is right and one way is wrong. And let's really just get into this mindset of one way, that it's just different ways are different. And we don't want to say that one is more appropriate than the other. But historically, I think neurodivergent people have absolutely been taught that, explicitly in many cases by teachers and parents that that the way they behave on a fundamental level is flawed, and they need to learn how to correct it. And that's still happening very actively today, for sure.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard things echoed, especially from my kids in school. That
Yeah.
it seems like the kids, as far as acceptance, are far ahead of the teachers, which is not traditionally what you would think about kids. They're usually very unaccepting, but I think at least towards high school nowadays, it's becoming more the place, which gives me hope. Gives me definite hope.
Definitely.
But you were also talking about, I mean, it's a coin, right? The idea that if I hide things, I must be doing something bad. Well, the other side of that coin is those stories, how heavily they impacted me. Like, I've learned to be a more empathetic person, right? So I hear these stories and I genuinely can feel things from them. And the idea that you sharing that has entirely, or those folks, those kind folks that were nice enough to put that stuff out there, exposing themselves, has entirely changed the way I think and feel. And I know it's not their job. It's not, this burden placed upon them to educate everybody else, right? But I feel like those stories, that bit of bravery, has made me a better human. And I like to think that bravery, you coming on here, is going to make at least 2 other better humans, right? At least 2 other people are going to hear this, and they're probably going to be better for it. So it's definitely, I see why people would hide it, but I celebrate the courage, because I always want to be better. And when people take the risk, I really appreciate it for what it is.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that's the absolute hope that people would come away with the feelings that you came away with. And I have no idea, how common that is. Like, I don't know how many people were on that call and just thinking like, gosh, this is a bunch of weirdos, I don't know.
Or how many people thought, hey, I'm not alone. Yeah.
The fact that it affected you like that, and that you're consciously thinking about it, that's really amazing. So I mean, yeah, it feels really exciting to hear that, and I think that's really, that kind of reaction, I think, is really the reason that I want to use whatever platform I have. And I don't think my platform is very big, but within the tiny little world of Red Hat, I have a little bit of a platform, and in my little corner of LinkedIn, and so I want to, I want to reach people in that way. And if, and yeah, like to your point, like maybe it's only 1 or 2 people, but that's something.
Yeah. And I like to look at this through the lens of, I would assume I'm neurotypical ish. We're all different, right? But I also, it makes me look back at when I was a manager, and it just makes me think, I bet you I know I could have been better, right? I could have done better, but I don't know what I don't know. It's one of those things. And the fact that I'm discovering this stuff now gives me the opportunity to be better. So it makes me think of, like, managers, like if you could give them some strategies, and there's one, I have a quote. So I've read a couple of your articles. They're really well done. They're not too long a read. Most of them are 15 minutes max. And so it's, it's not a huge investment in time, but there's good nuggets. I think there's really good nuggets in there. So I would say if there were some strategies you would give to managers, right? Maybe they're neurotypical. I know you already gave one, or 2 actually, like what managers could do to sort of work with people. And I liked how you said, don't just save some of this stuff for neurodiverse people. Use these strategies on everybody, because honestly, when I heard them, I was like, yeah, they're actually really good. So if you could give us a couple more, I was just curious what you would have to say about that.
Yeah, this is something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I've actually been asking my neurodivergent colleagues for what they would like to see as well. And I think the first thing is really what you just said is that I do think that managers have to adopt tactics that create better acceptance and accommodation of neurodivergent people. But I don't think any of those tactics should be targeted at neurodivergent people. And I don't think, in other words, they should be targeted at everybody. And I don't think that any manager should wait until they think they have a neurodivergent person on their team or until somebody discloses to them a diagnosis. Because like in your story, that never happened, right? And so to go back to your story, the way I hear that more commonly playing out is when the manager goes to HR to say, hey, I need you to help me develop a performance plan for this person because it's not working out. Rather than, so it's immediately like a performance problem rather than like I wonder, this person seems really smart and talented. I wonder what we can do differently to help them get this work, through the final stages. And so that's the first thing is just, assume that you have neurodivergent people and assume that everyone will benefit from the tactics that you employ. And I would say a couple of big tactics that I think about are one is absolutely curiosity. Is we are very quick to judgment, and I think especially in a for-profit corporation that has high expectations, and we've all got some big deliverables that are hanging over us. We all feel pressure that making judgments about productivity or making assumptions about what's causing a performance problem is very, very common. So the first thing I'd say is if you're feeling a judgment, if you're feeling that sense of judgment, or you're feeling like there's a problem, just really try and switch to curiosity and say, okay, let me try and figure out what's going on here. Let me talk to this person so I can better understand their perspective and that I can better understand how I can support them. So that mindset shift is really important as a first step. The other thing that I think I would really encourage people to do is to look at the concept of a social agreement with your team. Sometimes these are called social contracts. It's a concept that's been around for a long time, but I've just seen it getting used a lot more very recently. And there's some good articles and like toolkits out there to help you do this. But essentially, you get the whole team together and you talk through what are the norms and expectations that you all have as a team working together. And the thing is, every team has social norms and expectations, but most of the time they're not explicitly written down and talked about. And so the problem is what it defaults to is the majority of people are fine with the sort of status quo of how things shake out. And then there's always going to be a minority of people who don't get it. And they keep like inadvertently violating the norms. And it causes real problems for them. And so if we sit down and we talk about it, and, it could be as simple as, we're going to all agree to raise our hands before we talk in a meeting. Or we're going to all agree that it's okay to have your camera off in a meeting. Or we're gonna help each other understand why we don't want to assume positive intent. This is actually one of the biggest points of confusion. Usually when we talk about a social contract, almost every time somebody says, oh, we got to add on there, assume positive intent. And then what I always say is, assuming positive intent is basically excusing bad behavior. So don't assume positive intent, don't assume negative intent, but just seek to understand what the intent is before you make any kind of judgment about it. So usually it gives me an opportunity to talk about it when somebody says we should assume positive intent. But whether they say it or not, I usually suggest in a social contract putting in, don't assume intent, but seek to understand intent. And that can be, so just things like that just kind of say like, let's set the expectations for how we engage with each other. It could be really simple stuff like, I expect people to reply to emails within 24 hours. Or it could be, a lot of it's about how we communicate, but it could be also about, making assumptions, how we approach each other. How do we clarify who's responsible for what, all kinds of things. So just establishing that social agreement. And there's a bunch of really good examples out there that you can kind of start from. The key to doing that is that everybody has to be present, like in the room physically or virtually. Everyone has to have an opportunity to comment on each item. And then after you create it, everyone signs it. And so you shouldn't sign it if you don't agree with everything on it. But the idea is that everybody on the team agrees with every single thing on there. And you can think of it as like, it's like a page of sticky notes or something.
Yeah. So something you said there is definitely very close to something I've always said. I never say assume positive intent. I always say don't assume malice, right? Because it could be positive. There could be a positive intent, or it could be ignorance. And that could be ignorance of, I don't understand the social norms, or I didn't grow up in this area, so I don't know, this is what people generally do or anything like that. So the quote I pulled from one of your articles is default to curiosity. And I really like that because I've been at a point in my life, my younger career, when I knew everything and I was the smartest guy in the room, and I would say something, and then this only had to happen, I think, twice, and then somebody kindly corrected me in front of everyone, and I was like, maybe I should just approach these things curiously instead of I have the answer. Just start asking questions because I've noticed somebody would do something that I didn't expect. Right? Or they stopped in a project, they stopped somewhere, and you want to like, well, we had this deadline, what's the deal? You want to get mad, but then if you just approach it with curiosity, what happened here, there is a very plausible explanation. And oh yeah, I was right there with you, just somehow I forgot, I'm sorry. Or why are you late today? Oh, I'm on vacation, remember? You forgot to put it in your calendar. So there's all of these things that exist out there, and we are fallible, we are human, right? So I like to tell my kids, give yourself some wiggle room, right? Don't be definite about anything, leave yourself a little bit of an out.
And I think it's important for people to give themselves wiggle room. But to the point about don't assume malice, yes, and I think that's like, don't assume negative intent. But at the same time, what I think we all need to understand is that the impact of our actions is more important than the intent. Right. And so, we want to understand each other's intent, but we also want people to understand the impact that they are having regardless of what their intention is, right? And so if somebody's, it's like there's this kind of like legal concept that ignorance of the law is not an excuse for violating the law, right? And so it's like, just because you didn't mean to do something hurtful doesn't mean it's okay that you did something hurtful, right? And I think we still have a long way to go on this, to be honest. I see a lot of people apologizing by saying things like, I'm sorry you were hurt by what I said, instead of saying, I'm sorry that I hurt you, and so that's where I think we need to, in some cases, especially people in more senior leadership roles, I think in some cases we need to be harder on ourselves and say, you know what, it doesn't matter that I didn't have malice. I hurt you or I offended you and I apologize. But in other cases, when we are feeling judgmental, we want to default to curiosity and say, okay, I want to understand what's going on here before I like condemn somebody.
Yeah. I usually like to say, kind of the don't assume malice in that. Because if you're assuming somebody meant to hurt you, then you're going to want to react emotionally right there in the moment. And it's take a breath, take a beat, let's ask a question. Because it's, I mean, I don't think it's probably been like 8th grade since somebody said something to me just trying to hurt my feelings, right? It's like, it's been a really long time. So
most likely that's not what's happening. I think the other way I hear people talking about that a lot is to say, don't tell yourself stories, or recognize when you're telling yourself a story, right? So if you're assuming malintent, then you're probably in your head, you probably have a whole story going about why that person did what they did and what they did to make, and how they're just out to get you and blah, blah, blah. And so that's where, when you start telling yourself that story, is really a good opportunity to say, like, oh, wait a minute, I've got this whole story playing out in my head, and like, I'm just making this all up, like, you got to realize, like, you don't know what's in that person's head.
Right. And my brain will invent the worst case scenario out of everything.
Totally.
So if my mom didn't call me, well, when she said she would, obviously she's in the emergency room and on life support. Yeah. It's like my brain does all kinds of interesting things.
Yeah, exactly.
But something else you were talking about, the social contract, that sparked something else in my mind. The idea that you have kind of these social norms that sort of everybody agrees to. And I was thinking, for me, when I came into my current team as the guy that was on the outside, we didn't really have those established social norms. Like, I didn't know, am I okay to I knew I was okay to ask questions in here, but it's like, am I going to be bothering people? Because it's something I've never wanted to be, is like a burden on other people, which is crazy. Like, I won't give myself the grace that I will give a stranger on the street, because if anybody ever needs something of me, I'm perfectly happy to help them. And it actually makes me feel good. I love helping other people. So I should assume that people are probably okay with that. But like that social norm, like when I started, if they just said, like, hey, ask any question in here, we're totally happy to help. And, just lay out some of those, like that would have helped my anxiety level a little bit. And I don't know. It's good and bad. It made me figure out stuff the hard way, which makes it stay in my brain better, but it also could have saved me a lot of time and trouble of looking around. So I just, at least looking through that lens, I can see how that would be really helpful, even for if it's not, neurodivergent person, or you're not worrying about neurodiversity, just anybody coming in. Like that actually is a really good policy that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever listen to Krista Tippett and her podcast? She's a podcaster who does, or a radio host who does these really intense philosophical conversations. But so her show is on National Public Radio, but she has a podcast version where it's the unedited conversation. And the reason I mention it is just because what I notice is that the tape starts going when they're doing the sound check, and she always lays out in the beginning what I think of as a little, kind of like a little mini social contract, where she just kind of says, these are the kinds of things I'm going to ask about. Here's how I want you to feel. Is it okay if I call you by your first name? I mean, it's like all these little things to just kind of set the parameters of, like, let's make sure that we have the same understanding about what we're about to do here. And I think that that's the thing about a social contract. That's kind of a big term, but it could literally take 30 seconds to sync on something like that. Like, it doesn't have to be a big deal. It can be very, very easy to do.
That makes me think of, I did this Sandler training, which is like sales training, and I sort of peripherally did it. I didn't get to actually do it. But one of the things they talked about was an upfront contract. For every conversation, at the beginning, you say, this is what we're going to talk about. This is the outcome we're looking for, and this is what we're going to do afterwards. Is that okay? So you get everybody to agree upon it.
Yeah.
So that way, it'll run its natural course, and then you're not surprised when I call you tomorrow and say, hey, please sign this contract, or whatever it happens to be. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. That's a super helpful thing for neurodivergent people. Yeah. If every meeting started that way, that would be great. Yeah.
I remember one of the things you said that you find to be really helpful that is often missing is in your meeting invites, because we get a lot of meeting invites, not having an agenda in there. Is that what you call that, a pet peeve of yours?
No, that's not a pet peeve of mine. I think it's a pet peeve of like most people, definitely most neurodivergent people. That is another one of my, I guess, in terms of tactics, like, yes, please put an agenda in the meeting invite and invite people to contribute to the agenda as well. So, better yet, make the agenda in like a shared document that people can comment on. It makes such a big difference because having meetings, there's kind of two things. One, when the invite comes, you get an invite from someone, you know something about them. In some cases, you don't know anything about them. And then you look at it and it's just like totally blank. A lot of people, their mind will just start reeling about like all those stories, like, oh my God, what do they want to talk about? How do I prepare for this? What if they ask me about something that I'm not sure about and I look like an idiot? Am I going to get fired? It's like, you go through this whole cycle of things. I just had this experience with an HR person who's put a couple of meetings on my calendar without an agenda. And what I do is I just reply and I say, hey, do you have an agenda for this meeting? Because it would just help me understand, how to be prepared for it. And, if you don't have time to structure an agenda for a meeting, then really, I don't think you should be taking everyone else's time to have the meeting, right? I mean, like, if you're going to ask all these people to put in a half hour, an hour, at least like, give them a sense of what you're talking about and what you want to, what's the purpose of this? Why are we doing this? So yeah, that's a huge one actually. And when there's a structured agenda in a meeting, it's a huge anxiety relief to people. It's one of the things I hear most commonly as a complaint from my neurodivergent colleagues.
Well, I would consider myself fairly neurotypical, and I 100% appreciate an agenda, especially as many meetings as we bounce around to. Being able to look and quickly just put my brain in the right headspace. Okay, this is the things, and this is because I always prepare stuff ahead of time, but I might have 3 customer meetings a day for like 4 days straight, and so just knowing which pieces I need to like sort of mentally shift into, God, that's so helpful for me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anyone who's ever said, God, I wish you would stop putting agendas in your meetings. Like, never heard that from anyone. So
yeah, for sure. All right, Sam. Well, believe it or not, we are at time, and I try and be very respectful for time. Like, speaking of pet peeves, that is one of mine. I try and be a very tight stickler on time. So cool. To be honest, I don't even know that I touched any of my notes in there, but we covered a lot of ground. I want to right here at the end first ask you if you had a specific way you'd want people to get in touch with you, interact with you in some way. How would you? What's your preferred medium for that?
Oh yeah, probably LinkedIn is that's probably the only. It's probably shows my generation, but like it's Sam FW on LinkedIn or just search for Sam Knuth and that'd be great. I love connecting with people and just kind of being in network, and LinkedIn is where I share stuff and where I find it's easiest for me to connect with people. So yeah.
Okay, rock and roll. And I've noticed on LinkedIn you do a lot of article writing in there. So I've seen, I mean you're very prolific on all of that stuff. It looks like you're always looking for community engagement. I think we all are, right? So you put something out there so that other people will see it and appreciate it.
Exactly.
So, definitely reach out there. Well, all I can say is thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. When people give you their time, it is absolutely a gift, especially as busy as we all stay these days. And you gave me everything I could have asked of you, which was to be open and honest. And I know that can be dangerous, but as you said, I don't give a damn anymore. So
yeah. Well, thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. Likewise, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the opportunity and the interest, and I hope it's useful and interesting for someone.
Always keep lighting up those people one at a time. All right, let me hit stop real quick.